Before we start today's episode, I would like to quickly read you our podcast disclaimer. The content in this podcast is for general reference and educational purposes only. It is not meant to be complete or exhaustive or to be applicable to any specific individual's medical condition. No information provided in this podcast constitutes medical advice and is not an attempt to practice medicine or to provide specific medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. This podcast does not create a physician-patient relationship and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please do not rely on this podcast for emergency medical treatment. Remember that everyone is different, so make sure you consult your own healthcare professional before seeking any new treatment and before you alter, suspend, or initiate a new change in your routine. Welcome to The Starting Gate. We're your hosts, Dr. Kitty Dotson
and Dr. Sarah Schuetz,
two internal medicine doctors who spent years practicing traditional primary care. Over time, we realized something was missing from modern healthcare. A real understanding of how everyday lifestyle choices impact overall health.
We'll help you cut through the noise of the countless health influencers and their conflicting opinions, because no matter who you follow, the basics of lifestyle medicine are at the heart of it all.
Welcome back to The Starting Gate. We're your hosts, Dr. Kitty Dotson
and Dr. Sarah Schuetz.
So last week, Sarah was kind enough to share her experience with us about her house fire, and we got to talk with Lexington Fire Chief Jason Wells, who taught us so much about fire safety. But Sarah has learned a lot of other things in this process as well, particularly about insurance and just what you go through after having a loss. And so she is going to share that with us today.
So my whole objective of today's show was to just help individuals understand more about their insurance, because I will be bluntly honest, I knew nothing about my homeowner's insurance prior to this situation. And now I realize how important it is to actually understand your policy and all the details that are in there. So I am super excited about our guest today. We have Hays Featherston, who works with Assured Partners. He was our personal homeowner insurance agent, and I will always be so grateful because on the day of our fire, Hays actually called within, I don't know, it was like within an hour or an hour and a half of the fire occurring, and called my phone and immediately just was there to support us and let us know that everything was going to be okay. We had great homeowners insurance, and he was going to walk us through that and has held our hand ever since through this process. So we are very grateful for you, Hays, and thank you for coming on our show today to be able to help our listeners understand some of those questions they should be asking to make sure that they have great coverage in case they ever have to experience a tragic event like this. Hays, can you give our listeners a little bit of information about you?
Thank you so much, Sarah and Kitty, for having me on today. This is just a wonderful opportunity to just educate the community about what insurance and homeowners insurance can be. And to share experiences like you're sharing today is important. I feel grateful to be on here today and talk about a little bit more about something I'm very passionate about and have been passionate about for 12 to 13 years now. From Lexington, Kentucky, I went to Henry Clay High School. Then I went to Western Kentucky and came back home. And I've been an insurance agent since. I'm very passionate about this community and thankful to be in the position I am with such a great company and represent so many great companies.
I think the best way to get us started on this is let's just talk about what should someone understand about their homeowner's insurance when it comes to fire damage.
Yeah, fire damage is something that's a typical covered loss on a policy. But I think you have to be aware of being prepared for the aftermath of a loss like this. And so by doing so, you sometimes just need to know what the typical coverages are that come into play when we talk about fire losses. And on an insurance policy and the structure of it, there is what you would call a dwelling coverage. And then there's other structures coverage, your personal property coverage, and loss of use coverage.
Okay, tell me more. I don't know what any of that means.
Sure. So on those coverages, you would find that dwelling coverage is what the amount that we find your home would be replaced for at the time of a loss. Then we look at other structures, which is anything that is not attached to your home. So those are things that is automatic coverage. Other structures is automatically included on your policy because, say, Sarah forgot to tell me that she was building another structure or a garage or a building on her land and she forgot to tell me about it and it's not attached to her home. Well, at that point, we would need additional coverage for that. So on a homeowner's policy, it's typically always automatically covered up to a certain percent of the amount of your homeowner's coverage dwelling amount.
So if you built a little she shed in the backyard,
Yeah.
then you're telling me that would be covered, or I need to call and let you know that I did that?
Unless it's something that's extravagant, then typically it would be covered in policy. But it's always important to talk to your agent about if it is or is not. It is always important to tell your agent that you are building something on your land.
Okay. Yes, that's a good point. Depending on your situation, you may not think about that necessarily. And you also mentioned personal property coverage. That is its own separate bucket of coverage that you have on your policy, correct?
That's correct. So personal property is another separate bucket that's automatically included on your policy. Typically 50% of the dwelling amount that I talked about. So let's say your home is $1 million, then you would automatically typically have 50% of that, which is $500,000 in personal property coverage.
Now, let's say you feel like you have more than that in personal property. Is that something that you're able to get additional coverage if you feel like your contents is more than that 50%?
Yes, absolutely. Again, you want to notify your agent, talk through it, and see what really is a good fit for you when it comes to the amount of personal property you have in your home.
And that last bucket, this is the one that I didn't know existed at all, is the bucket of, and what is the terminology you use? I think of it more of additional living expenses right after the situation to help with rent or whatnot. What is that, the technical term for that?
Yeah, so the technical term for that can be either loss of use or additional living expenses, depending on the carrier you're working with.
And what kind of coverage does that typically look like? Or is that one of those things that varies a lot?
Yeah, so that's one of those that does vary, but it's really there to help pay for certain things like temporary housing. If you have to stay in a hotel, and that's always the amount of cost or expenses that would be during the construction time of rebuilding your home.
And that is something that we were able to use because we have chose to rebuild our home. So we're in a rental house and our insurance, we're using that additional living expenses to pay our rent in the home that we're staying in temporarily.
Yeah, and it's another thing that you really want to talk to your agent about as well, because there can be a certain amount of limited coverage on that. In your scenario, we had actual loss sustained. So that would be a reasonable expense amount, but no true limit.
So being that we were able to find a house in our current neighborhood and move into it to rent, and they covered the cost of that rent to have a similar living situation. Because, again, this was something I knew zero about, and Hays had to come in and let me know that I was okay, that they were going to be able to cover that aspect. So if you haven't looked into that, would be something you want to make sure that you have good coverage, because even in a situation that's not a total loss like our home was, you can correct me if I'm wrong, even if you have partial damage in your house and you're having to move out for a period of time, this would kick in as well.
That's correct, yes. If there's a situation where the house is not livable or habitable, then yes, it would help cover while you're out for those repairs.
On this note, what are some common misconceptions people have about their fire coverage or are just completely clueless about it?
Yeah, well, I think when you sign up for an insurance policy, some people assume that there's really no responsibility. You pay for the premium and everything will be taken care of if something goes wrong. And then there's no really responsibility on the homeowner's part. And I think everybody needs to be aware that you have to be prepared to have some sort of responsibility in a claim scenario, because you have to be responsive, you have to provide documentation, and you have to have firm communication and understand how that communication works so that it goes as smooth as possible. And I think having an agent explain that to you is important before the claim really gets started, or have them on the phone with you with claims adjusters in certain situations and such, so you're guided.
And you just mentioned a claims adjuster. This is also something I'm not sure everyone realizes. So you are our insurance agent, but then we also have an adjuster because we did have a fire and communicate with them. Can you define for our listeners the difference between what an insurance agent is responsible for, and then when a situation happened, what does an insurance adjuster do?
Yeah, I think a good way to look at it is that an agent is someone who helps you prepare a policy that fits your needs. And It helps provide coverage and tailor a plan to what you need it to look like and be an advisor for the actual client or customer. An adjuster comes in when a claim scenario happens, and they evaluate the situation of the claim and they find out what really happened and how it's going to be paid out on the carrier's behalf. The carrier, I'm saying, is the insurance company, not the agency.
I think that's an important thing to understand because it's really nice having an agent that's there to help support you in that communication that you had this long-term relationship with, because you're not going to know who your adjuster is. And I think that's made a big difference for us when it's come to navigating all of these things that are new, and many people can't even give you any point of reflection because they haven't experienced it themselves. So it's been helpful having someone that knows what's going on to explain what we should expect from an insurance adjuster. So Hays, for our listeners, can you let them know the difference? Because I don't know if everyone understands this. You work for Assured Partners, and how your job as an insurance agent may be different than someone works under an insurance company directly, like one of the big names that you might see on commercials like Progressive or State Farm, etc.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit different. I represent an independent agency. So I have access to many different carriers. And what I do is I usually, when I speak with somebody or somebody comes to me and would like to discuss their insurance with me, I gather their information and I try to figure out what would be a good fit for my new client and try to figure out what would be really what they're looking for through all the other insurance companies and carriers that I represent as well. So I don't have one product. I have several different products.
Yeah. Okay. So if you went directly to one of these bigger companies, State Farm, Progressive, Allstate, and you meet with an agent there, then basically they're giving you their product options versus if you see an independent agent like you, then you might give State Farm's options and Progressive options and whichever one you thought best matched what you needed. Is that
right? Yeah. That's exactly right.
It's almost a way that you're able to shop around with someone who's an expert than trying to shop around by yourself.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah. That's a good point.
And with that being said, I think it's important also for our listeners to understand when they're looking for an insurance agent, what is something that they should be considering? Because I know a lot of times in the moment, price is about the only thing that you're wanting to think about when you're picking out your policies. But what are some other things that you would encourage our listeners to consider when they're picking policies and picking an agent to help them figure out what's best for them?
Yeah, I think it's important to find somebody that can look out for your interest and really do an evaluation of what your assets are and how they can be properly protected. I think it's really important to keep the bottom line out of your mind when you're choosing an agent and just really consider coverages first and then find a way to get to that price point that you're looking for after we figure out what coverages are important. So if you're speaking with an agent, think about that first and then try to figure out a way to get to the price that is more obtainable.
Now, when we talk about our coverage of our dwelling, again, I didn't understand this up front. Can you explain to listeners the replacement costs versus an actual cash value, the understanding of what it is in your policy if you want to rebuild? Because all of that I was clueless on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's important for us to understand that homeowners policies aren't all the same. There's a lot of different types of homeowners policies. And when you're talking about different ones, is just to keep it simple, is there's a standard form and then there's a broad comprehensive. And when we talk about those two different forms, there's things that can be added. So a lot of times you can't build back for full replacement cost on a form. It can be placed on actual cash value. And so a comprehensive form will always have replacement cost. And so we talk about the differences between replacement cost and actual cash value. Replacement cost would be, and I'll just give you a quick definition here. Replacement cost is the amount it costs to rebuild at the time of loss with today's materials. Actual cash value would be the replacement cost minus depreciation based on the age and the condition at the time of loss.
And I think that's really important to understand about your policy, because what we have quickly learned starting this process is it is going to be more expensive to rebuild our home than it would be to just buy our home. And I think that's a easy summary of the difference between those two. It really would make a difference for someone if they are wanting to rebuild, because it could be a huge gap in that amount.
Yeah, and I think what's important is to talk to your agent about some endorsements that can be added. Here's just a few that have to relate to a fire loss. It's called additional replacement cost. That means that you can, at the time of loss, there's an amount that can be added if that amount, let's just say your house is $800,000 and they find out in a total loss that's not going to be enough to rebuild your home. Then if you have an additional replacement cost endorsement on the policy, then they will actually pay above and beyond that when they find out it costs more to rebuild back. There's a guaranteed replacement cost endorsement, and that's if we find out it's a lot more. And so let's just say the home's $800,000 and they come back and say, with today's materials, it's actually going to cost 1.5 to rebuild back. And that's when you get several different quotes from different construction companies and talk through it with the adjuster and your agent and your in-house claims team. Guaranteed replacement cost is a very helpful endorsement to a policy.
And again, these were all words that I didn't know existed.
Yeah, I feel like a fish out of water right now. But I do know that materials are expensive right now and have been for the last, I guess since COVID is when things shot up as far as materials go, and they're still going up.
Supply and demand, yeah. I would say that there's one other thing relating to our area here in Lexington is that a lot of these homes are older. And so if you don't have replacement cost on there, then it'd be hard to build back with those materials. So the replacement cost allows you to rebuild back today's materials. And so what a lot of times I see is that ordinance and law coverage should be on majority of my policies with additional coverage on top of it on ordinance law. And so what that means is building codes change, and you find that out, and that's going to cost more because you have to do something different to rebuild that home to be with standards of the building codes.
Oh, that's a good point too, because lots of things change depending on if you have a 50, 60-year-old home versus a 10-year-old home. That could be a wide variety in changes that have occurred since then.
A lot of my clients actually, I talk to them about a cash out option. So a lot of them will have the ability, if they have a cash out option endorsement on their policy, they'll say, if my house burns down, I'm just not going to build back.
Yeah, and that's a question that I've gotten a lot. If we didn't feel comfortable going back on our lot and didn't want to be there, that wasn't the case for us. But if that was an option, using a cash out. So explain,
Yeah,
yes,
so,
I think that's good to explain.
Yeah, so if you qualify, your home qualifies, or you qualify with the carrier for a cash out option, then you say your home's $1.2 million and it's set on the policy $1.2 million, and it completely burns down, and they're like, oh, well, I'm just going to go live in South Carolina. I don't want to live. Well, they're going to give you that cash out endorsements on the policy. So they're going to give you 1.2 in cash, and you can just not have to deal with it.
But you pay more on your yearly to have that option.
Yes.
Okay. So let's say you're rebuilding like Sarah is. Do you have to rebuild your house exactly like it was? And I know we're talking about using new materials, but does it need to be the same?
I think it has a lot to do with similarities in square footage, but it doesn't have to be exactly the same. Like Sarah's got older kids now, and things have changed. They may want to make it a little bit different to fit their needs now than what they had before. I think a lot of it has to do with being on a good communication with your adjuster and your contractor and making sure that we're all on the same page ahead of time before construction starts. And I think you can work through those things with your carriers.
And that's something that we have wanted to change, where a bedroom was located or use space that was a dining room differently, but it's not really changing the overall cost to rebuild it. It's just adjusting what the floor plan looks like and not changing the square footage. So that was a question I had up front and didn't really know, but it is very helpful because I've been asked that by so many people. Hey, do you get to make changes or not? Or you have to rebuild the exact same house. So I think that's important to understand as well.
Can I ask maybe this is a dumb question. We've been talking about this because Sarah had a fire and lost her house due to a fire. Why else might you lose your house that's covered under your regular homeowners?
There's all kinds of different perils, what we call perils, causes of loss. And you can lose your house. We just had storms last night with tornadoes that could have come through and probably devastated a lot of people. There's other ways. Water losses can come through. You go out of town, and let's just say you don't have an automatic water shutoff valve in your house. It doesn't shut off your water, and your whole house is destroyed because you were out of town and didn't realize that there was a leak. There's so many different things that can happen, but yeah, fire is probably our most common when it comes to a total loss.
And while we're on that note, is there a difference in your policy that you should be looking at for other big disasters? Let's go through them. What about a tornado? Do you have to have a specific tornado coverage, or is that included?
Yes, tornado is actually included, and it's just like a fire cause of loss. It's included in all insurance policies. The only time that it can get a little bit different is hurricane and wind coverage. When you're in coastal areas, they have started with all the losses in southern Florida and Florida in general. They've had to put a separate wind and hurricane policy in place instead of it being attached to the actual homeowner. So there's an additional premium to that in the coastal areas.
One that we don't talk about a lot here are earthquakes. Are earthquakes covered?
Yes, earthquake can be covered, but it has to be added to your policy by endorsement, like we've talked about here recently, all these what we call endorsements or add-ons that I've discussed. Earthquake is one of those that you need to tell your agent about, discuss it, see if it's something that you're wanting to have on your policy. It is a little bit expensive, and the deductible structure is different than a typical homeowner's loss structure.
And then the last one that's a little bit close to home here in Kentucky, what about floods?
Flood is also another policy that needs to be in place. Some carriers will allow us to add it on, but for me, I have a flood unit that quotes. I send the information to my flood unit. They quote it and see if their existing carrier they're with for their homeowners would be a good fit for their flood, or if we need to place it with another flood company that would be a better fit.
So depending on where your home is, you may need to have more coverage. Is
Yeah,
that correct?
absolutely.
Okay.
So you can be in flood zones and it'd be required by a bank. If you don't have a mortgage, then you can self-insure that. Yes, some areas you need to really consider flood.
And so you might have your policies through your insurance agent, but that insurance agent may have your regular dwelling fire coverage through one adjuster and company that would pay for that, but your flood might be through a different one.
That's correct.
Okay.
It's two separate policies.
And when we are talking about policies, are there any specific exclusions or loopholes that people miss on a regular basis that you're always trying to point out?
Water backup coverage is something that's left off policies. Sometimes percentage deductibles can be on policies and customers don't understand that. And when I say percentage deductible, it means if your home is valued at $500,000 on replacement cost on the policy and you have a 1% deductible, then that means your deductible could be $5,000. And some people don't realize that it's a lot of times there's a flat deductible that could be for all peril, which is a fire, which is $2,500. And then for wind, hail, it could have a percentage.
Oh, so really paying attention to those details based off of each type of damage.
Yes.
I tend to think of deductibles in the realm of health insurance. So does that mean if you had a $5,000 deductible that you have to be ready to have that $5,000 available at the beginning? Or does that just mean they'll knock off? You'll have to pay $5,000 at some point. Do you need it right then when the disaster happens?
No, that's a good question, but it's your burden in a loss from actual cash value. So what that means is on the first payment on a $500,000 loss, which is a total loss of your house, and you have a $5,000 deductible, the company's going to make a first payment to the construction company for you to make a payment to them. They're going to subtract $5,000 from that first payment. And then that's it. The rest of it would be on the insurance. So it's your burden in a loss.
So you at least need to make sure you have that in reserves when you get started rebuilding.
I think it's important for everybody, whether it's an auto policy or a homeowner's policy, to think about what is the amount you can put in your savings for a deductible amount.
And I know that's also something, learning about how this whole process works and the importance of an emergency fund. because when it comes to collecting the money for the actual items in your home, that doesn't come as the fire happens. That's something that happens way down the road. So you have to keep that in mind because there's a process to go through. So I think that's something that maybe some of our listeners may not realize, that there is a lot of information the insurance is going to ask from you before you even are able to get money in return to help start the rebuild process, as well as to get the amount for the contents in your home as well.
What has been the most surprising thing to you that they've asked you about that you thought, oh my gosh, can't believe anyone would even ask about this?
So I think this is helpful to understand because, again, this is not something that I thought about. I honestly didn't realize this is how it worked. But when it comes to your content specifically, in order to obtain the replacement costs for your personal property, there will be a process that you have to undergo of documenting all the things that are in your home. And so this is a part that I really want our listeners to know about, because there are things that we could have done that may not have taken all that much time, but could have saved us a lot of time and energy where we are now. And that is, you are putting in a file every single thing in your home in order for insurance to understand the value of your contents. So we're talking down to like staplers that you had in your house, all your clothing, your furniture, everything. Every single item in your home, you have to put in an inventory. So to help better prepare for that, and what we will always do moving forward, is taking videos inside your home, because that can be a very easy way to help you have an inventory of what is located in your house. It also helps when insurance may be having questions about, hey, did you really have this? Especially on those high value items, you have an actual log of what was in your home.
So if you were going to do that, because that seems like a pretty quick way of someone to try to be proactive about this, when you take your video, should you open your cabinets then and just see what's under the kitchen sink, go to the closet?
It depends on the items. We've been able to go back and log into Target, Costco, and look at the most recent purchases to come up with some of the grocery inventory that we had. But when it comes to your clothing or kids' toys, all that aspect, that's really hard. So if we had opened up those closets, had actually taken a video that just helped your mind remember all those different items that you had, that would have been extremely helpful. And there's no way we're ever going to remember all the books and toys and the kid items in general. So that one's one that's very challenging to come up with as well. And another thing that's very helpful is very expensive items. So I would say anything that's over $500 in your home, if you keep receipts of that, because it's going to be really easy to communicate with your insurance adjuster on these high price items, that it's clear of how much the cost was when you purchased it. You know exactly when you purchased it. So understanding the depreciated value will be much easier, and there will be less back and forth on trying to get that settled if you have all that proof. Today, it's much easier because there's so many receipts that we get in our emails. And I will say, through this whole process, I will forever just keep a folder and have all my receipts emailed if they offer that. But if you do buy bigger items that do not have that option, this would be a great thing to keep in your fireproof safe. And I've had that. So you have documentation of that piece of furniture, especially if you bought something that is hard to find, like an antique or whatnot, or maybe one of a kind item. So you have proof of how much you actually spent on it.
Or even, do you think they would be okay if you took a picture and you've got the picture of the receipt on your cloud of photos or whatever?
Yes. However, just some sort of proof of that. It makes it clear and much easier to communicate with your insurance company if you have that option. I don't know. Is there other things that you advise, Hays?
Like before you go on vacation, videotape the inside of your house, do a video and send it to your insurance agent and have it on our agency file. You can do that, or on an annual basis, at least video your home with all that. But I think you had a great idea there with, at least on all the large ticket items, having a receipt, putting it in a folder, a secured folder, and just popping it in there is a great idea. I think that's a wonderful idea.
And it doesn't matter how old it is, because sometimes, I know that was our process. After we had a receipt for so long, we're like, oh, there's no use of keeping this. Let's throw it out. But in this situation, actually still does matter, because then you have proof of when you actually bought it. Because when you're working with insurance for this belonging and contents aspect, they're going to ask you how long you've actually owned something as well. So as many things you have inventory of how old they are, that's going to help you and make your life easier as well.
Getting a lot of calls from my California clients, and they've been very scared about this wildfire situation going on and everything. And so they've been calling me on how should we go about looking at if something were to happen. And so making a checklist and taking videos is very helpful in that scenario.
And another thing this would bring up, and something that maybe we should have done a better job of, is my husband collected a lot of sports memorabilia and was a jersey collector in general. So for items that have a higher value in your home, what are some ways you can add additional protection? I know one that we've heard as we've done this, we didn't have a lot of art, so that wasn't a big deal for us. But for people who do have very expensive items in their home, how should they protect these better?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. I think this is something that we try to go through with our clients in the beginning, but at least talk about a personal articles policy. And so personal articles policy is for valued items. What you need to have is just a list of valued items, the description and value. And depending on the value, the insurance carrier will ask for possibly an appraisal. Now, this is a policy that's additional cost, but there's no deductible that applies if something happens to those items. So they're paid out for the amount on the policy that's listed. And possibly with some carriers, if it has appreciation, then they'll pay out the appreciated value. But there is an additional premium to that. So some people don't think it's worth it. But if I do take this ring and go on vacation, if I lose it, then what happens then? I was like, you have to have it scheduled because it's going to be outside of the home. And if you have it scheduled, you'll be able to get the amount listed on the policy with no deductible. If anything happens to it, if it were to be theft, misplaced, lost, stolen, or damaged in any way, worldwide coverage with most companies.
Oh, that's a very good point. I hadn't even thought about that. When you actually remove it from the home, that everything changes on the coverage.
We don't have enough fancy jewelry to
I don't have fancy jewelry, so I've never been worried about this. But my Oura ring's almost the most expensive thing I have.
For fine arts, if you have it hanging and there's breakage coverage if you have it scheduled. If it falls for some reason, it's covered on the policy amount listed on the policy.
And for people who may not have that already, most insurance policies, it would be in the fine print of what there might be a max that they have on their homeowner's policy to cover art, or how could they explore what they have without this additional rider?
Yeah, there's sublimits for certain situations on a homeowner's policy for those types of items. And so they would only pay out a max amount. So if you do have it listed on a personal articles policy, there's no max amount. It's amount listed item.
So big takeaway for our listeners are, if you have very expensive items in your home, be sure that you're having these discussions with your insurance agent to make sure your coverage is what you think it is.
And what about if you work from home and you have a pretty extensive home office in your home? Is there any additional things you should think about in that situation?
Yeah, if you have a home office, then there can be business coverage that can be added by endorsement. But there's minimal coverage automatically on the policy.
That was one I wasn't aware of, and they were reading it off to us when we were going over our policy. We were okay. It wasn't a big deal to us, but I was like, oh, that's something that people may not realize.
Yeah. So a lot of times you would have what's called a business owner's policy to cover you for a lot of those items, or they might be listed on an inland marine business owner's policy. And so those items would be covered and extended to your in-home office. But if you have a lot of traffic in and out of your house for business reasons, then I highly suggest getting a business owner's policy or a general liability policy for that entity that you're doing the business in.
When else do you recommend having a general liability policy? Or do you recommend that for everybody?
So homeowner's policy has liability on it. So if you have guests over for a party and they trip and fall and get hurt, and for some reason they sue you, then you have coverage for that. But a general liability policy for business reasons is you have to have a general liability policy for any business, really.
What about if you have a swimming pool or if you have a trampoline in your backyard and someone falls and breaks their arm on the trampoline?
Yeah, I think it's important for you to notify your agent that you're getting a trampoline or you have a pool as soon as you get one or plan to build one. It's very important to do so because initially when you didn't have a pool or a trampoline, you may have checked on the application where it says and states, does this insured have a trampoline or a pool? And you say no. And then you add one and forget to tell us. Liability coverage could be a situation if somebody gets hurt and you have people over and you forget to talk about that with your agent.
All good points. Another situation that I didn't know how this would play out either is, so our home was the cause of a fire. Our neighbors on both sides also had damage, but it wasn't our homeowner's insurance that covered that. It was their personal homeowner's insurance that picks up. Is that typically what would occur in all those situations, that even if it's not their home that causes it, if it's another home, that it's their personal homeowner's insurance?
If it's an act of God, then typically their insurance would come into play. You hear a lot of times with these storms that we have, a tree falls, it's on your property, hits your neighbor's house. It was an act of God. So it's really their insurance policy, even though it's your tree, that would react.
But if you were cutting the tree down and you didn't do it right and it fell on their house,
Liability.
then that's you.
So liability, that's when liability comes into.
And with that being said, another question I've been asked is, in the situation of our fire, we found out it was electrical fire, that we weren't the cause of it. What occurs if you did something by accident, like leaving a fire pit burning and it causes a fire in your home, or even outside your home? Does insurance do something different? Do they still have the same amount of coverage? Are there loopholes there?
It's a good question. Yes, the policy in those scenarios will likely cover for those circumstances, but unless it's for arson, obviously, that would be something that would not be covered. But most likely in those circumstances, it would be covered. But if they find out that you leave a fire pit burning or overloading an outlet or forgetting to turn off an appliance, and they find out that was the cause of the loss, a lot of times then the insurance carrier may non-renew the policy. And then you find yourself with that mark on you, I guess is what you would say. And you'd have to say that on your next application to another carrier. And then you may find yourself in a non-standard homeowner's policy, which does not have all the bells and whistles coverage, and it's higher premium most of the time.
Good reason. If you didn't listen to last week's show with Chief Wells giving you fire safety tips, go back and listen to that so that you don't accidentally do that. Maybe.
Yes,
that's a great idea.
All very important. And I think one thing that we learned from our situation is I didn't realize there was actually 2 different investigations that occur after a fire. The one that is from the local department. So we had a local investigation that was really trying to find out, was it arson or not? And they were able to determine it was not. And then they try to just define what bucket it fell in. Was it electrical? Was it cooking, etc.? But getting down to the really fine details is not necessarily something that the city is going to be doing. And your insurance has a investigator that comes in and really is trying to figure out what exactly caused the fire, because they're wanting to see, was there also some negligence, whether it's from a contractor or was it from something that you had in your house that malfunctioned? Was there an appliance that caught fire and should not have, etc.? So that was something that we learned through our process, is there's 2 different types of investigations that are occurring. And it was very helpful. I know our investigator taught me so much. He walked me through every single step to make sure I understood it. And I really appreciated that whole process that I had to go through.
And I would say that also in that scenario, when they send you back the report and they find out what's going on and it doesn't seem right to you, come back to your agent and let us utilize our in-house claims team to help navigate through that and make sure that the report is accurate.
I think we were very lucky that we had a great team that came and did ours. So I know that every situation is different, because we've heard different situations from people. Once you have a fire, people who have experienced one reach out and want to talk to you. And I know everyone's has not been the same as ours when it comes to that.
And so the reason why they do that is because they want to find a way, if it's truly due to a contractor or such, then they're going to need to try to subrogate out that claim so that they don't pay the full amount and somebody else it was truly their fault.
When you say the word subrogate, that was a new word for me today. So you're meaning if it did seem like it was in the process of building your home that someone had negligence there, that then your insurance company would try to get them to pick up part of that rebuilding cost?
You got it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
And Sarah knew exactly who to contact with her fire. You technically reached out to her before she even had time to reach out to you. But for people going through like the floods that have happened in Kentucky or a tornado that's knocked out several neighborhoods, and a lot of people at once are trying to get help from their insurance agent, I hear a lot of times that it's hard to find the right person to contact or talk to. what do you do in that situation?
You've got to call your insurance agent and get the policy claim started and get that process started. And then ask your agent, what are the next steps on documenting this? You've got to document, take pictures that you can, find everything that you can document, and so that we can get somebody out there to look at it as soon as possible. But if you're in a situation, always do loss prevention. And that's what I mean by that is call restoration companies to get out there as soon as possible. And we will make sure, don't worry about the payment or all that other stuff at the time of loss. Just get somebody out there to help.
Yes, because I know in our situation with it being a total loss is a little bit different. Had it not been a total loss, many times companies will come in and they're documenting everything that they're able to see, even if it cannot be restored, because that also will help with your inventory that you're doing, because they're able to take pictures and whatnot. And it's remarkable the things that they're able to restore as well when you've had smoke damage. There are companies that specifically focus on that. We were able to recover just a couple of baby blankets that happened to be wedged under multiple different things that Chris was able to find. And we had those restored, and my girls are able to snuggle with them again, and you would never have known that they were well, except one. You wouldn't have known that the majority of them were even in a fire. It is something that is a process up front that you want professionals there helping you immediately.
And that's just if you Googled restorative.
Or even if you ask,
Yes, your agent could tell you.
Yes, and they'll be able to guide you to the right people.
And for people in the situation of weather-related disaster where there's a lot of people dealing with the same thing, would the best thing be when it's safe to come back out, like after a tornado, or when it's safe to come back to your home after a flood, you just get your camera out and start videoing the whole thing? Because I imagine their adjusters may not be able to get to you quickly if they're trying to get to a lot of people at once.
Right. I think when you talk to your agent, you have a trusted contractor go out there, try to let them do all of that as much as possible. But yeah, if you can be on site and it's safe to be out there and they say it's safe, then yeah, try to document as much as you can and send those videos to your agent.
So we know there's been a lot of flooding in eastern Kentucky and other regions of Appalachia in the country. If somebody had homeowners insurance, but they didn't have a separate flood policy, what happens there?
They'll send instructions, but it's important for you to go ahead and file a claim, even if you know you don't have a flood policy, to go ahead and file it with your insurance homeowner's policy. It shows that it's denied, and you can provide that to FEMA so you can get in line quicker in that scenario.
So for people who do have flood insurance, they're going to be working directly with their insurance agency that's covering that. But for those who did not or could not get that additional flood coverage, that's when FEMA steps in. And you have to be able to provide specific documentation in order to use those funds.
That's correct,
Okay.
yes.
That's helpful to know.
And flood coverage, if you have flood coverage, it's much broader, and there's not as much limited coverage, obviously, because you paid for it.
So, Hays, here's a question for you. In Kentucky, we have lots of caves. Is that something we should be worried about?
Not a lot of carriers have what's called sinkhole coverage, and specific carriers actually provide it, and they have to file it and apply for sinkhole coverage on their plan or their policy, but some do. I do represent several carriers that do have sinkhole coverage, and you can add that by endorsement, just like an earthquake or water backup coverage.
And most of our listeners are here in Kentucky. Is there any other specific types of coverage that you think about for people here in this state?
Mine subsidence is one, and then actually mudslide is attached to a flood policy.
With how things have changed and the technology that's in our lives now that didn't used to be, are there any other things we need to think about in that realm that we need to be making sure we're insuring?
Yeah, I think technology is an attack these days in some standpoints, and you can add an endorsement called family cyber protection to your policy. And it can help recover your identity through fraud situations. It can also, in some scenarios, in some policy forms, will provide an endorsement where it would actually put the money back into your bank account for up to a certain limit if you have that coverage added. And it's additional premium, but if it's important to you, it's something we need to be talking about. So I think that cyber protection is a way that you can utilize if something were to happen to you, there is a team with that particular carrier that will take care of all that burden on your side of gathering or having to get someone to identify that person that stole from you, stole your identity. So it's a restoration situation.
And that's probably happening more often than we
It
realize
is
these days.
happening more often than I've ever seen.
All things that have never crossed my mind.
Yes, this has been a lot of information.
You can tell that Kitty and I are in healthcare. We're in a whole nother world
Oh
when
my
we're
gosh.
talking about homeowners insurance today. So we put ourselves out there.
So hopefully, after listening to this, you can go back and look at your policy. I feel like now I can look at that with a lot more knowledge and understand what we have. And hopefully we can all learn from what Sarah's been through and better document what we have and be more prepared if something were to happen. Sarah, I think another thing that those around you struggled with a little bit while you were experiencing this tragedy was wanting to know how you were doing, wanting to show you that they were thinking about you and wanting to help, but also not wanting to overwhelm you. Can you give us any thoughts about how we can support someone?
We can all learn from this. Before I even get started on that, I have to just take a moment and just say thank you. This will make me cry. Okay, I can do this. Just say thank you to the support that I did receive, because when I talk about my story, I tell people the first few days that it occurred, yes, it was tragic and I was sad. But I also just had an unbelievable feeling of joy that occurred because I was completely surrounded with love and support. And I did the show last week and I didn't cry at all. But this
I was
one,
going to say I brought tissues last week in case.
and this one, talking about this brings so much emotion because there is just no way to explain what we experienced. And I truly believe the support that we received from our family, friends, and community are the reason that we are up and running and able to do our lives in 2 months after a tragedy like this. And I just cannot say thank you enough. It is one of the reasons that I wanted to do these 2 shows and create these resources to be able to give back to all those people who gave so much to us. I'll never be able to say thank you enough or even thank all the people who supported us in that moment. It was very powerful, and I'm so very grateful for that. The things that were most helpful to us in that moment, I will say that there was a handful of people whose lives stopped in that same moment that ours did, and they just picked us up and carried us, because when you experience a tragic event, your brain does not work. And that is something I didn't understand how significant it would be, but you're just unable to even do simple tasks. And when you literally walk out and don't even own a jacket or shoes, there's a lot for you to do quickly. And I think sometimes we're too afraid to just act because we don't know if someone's going to like something or be what they want, etc. But really what helped our family the most is people didn't worry about that, and they just went and they made things happen. And within 24 hours of our fire, our children were clothed, had backpacks, had lunch boxes, and they went to school the next day. So it was extremely powerful what occurred. And so if you know someone that goes through something like this, just know that they are not going to be able to even communicate what they need, because it is just too big to even understand your to-do list at that moment. And one of the most helpful things to do is just act and be there. And if it becomes too much, then you can appoint someone to be the person for you as the communicator to help organize things. But it's just really hard to make decisions. And so I think that's the thing. If I ever have someone that goes through something similar, is realizing that I just need to go in and help them and not wait to be told what to do, because they can't even think in that moment, and there's just too much to do. So that's something that was huge. Thinking about people's immediate needs, and when you suddenly don't even have toothpaste, you don't even have a hairbrush, there are so many things, and thinking outside the box, because I'll say we received so many different clothing items up front, especially for my kids. But there were just all these other items that we don't even think that we use on a daily basis that were pretty quick, immediate needs. And it was very helpful when we received those as well, because it took Chris and I both, I would say, over a week to even be able to do shopping because it was so overwhelming trying to think through that. So those are some things. I also think that it's really important for kids that may go through this, something that helped my children tremendously is some of their closest friends. They brought them very specific items that they knew that they would love and cherish because they've lost all those things that give them comfort, and getting things from the people who love them the most. I know my oldest, she now has about 10 stuffed animals on her bed, and she knows every single person that gave those stuffed animals. And I think it provides her comfort because in that moment, she was able to have something again that was her own, and it came from those people who loved her. And so I think that is also really important. Another thing is when people have experienced a traumatic event, in those first periods of time, asking them a lot of questions about what happened, they may not be there right then. And I know that was something I struggled with up front, is it was hard for me to talk about it, and I wasn't at that place, but I was constantly being asked, oh, what happened? What happened? And that just didn't sit well with me because I was still so unsure and I didn't really have answers in that. So I've learned from that, and really moving forward, if someone experienced something traumatic, asking if they are even wanting to talk about it, or just giving them space to be able to bring it up themselves would be very valuable. Another such thing that I found valuable, depending on the person and their personality, is really finding a professional that has experience in dealing with traumas. I had the opportunity to meet with my psychologist that I had seen in the past and already had a relationship with, and that was very valuable to process this trauma. But if you've never had a relationship with someone before, trying to find someone who is trained in dealing with trauma to help you process this and not waiting for a year to 2 years later working through this. And I think that has been crucial to my recovery from this, is having that professional help, I think is very valuable when it comes to being able to move forward.
I think when you go through something, everyone wants to feed you to. As far as receiving food and things, is there anything you can recommend to people to help support a family going through something?
I think in those first few weeks, because of the overwhelming decision fatigue, I know sometimes I have the tendency to want to just give someone money to go get food because I'm too afraid to cook for them because I don't know what they like. But honestly, it was so nice when we literally had a meal prepared for us and we didn't have to even make that decision. It just showed up just because you were having to just make so many decisions. So even thinking about where to go to eat is just another item to think about. So it was very nice in those first few weeks. Now, after a few weeks, bringing in some of that food that is stuff that you personally love is helpful. But initially, when you just can't make any sort of decisions, that was very valuable.
And Hays, I know you've seen a lot of people go through a lot of different times like this. Has there been anything you've seen that seems helpful to families?
I would say that being there, letting them know that they can contact you whenever. As an agent, I want every client I have to have my cell phone and they can call me. They need me at any time. I think that them knowing me before any type of situation happens like this makes them feel comfortable that they can call me. And I think being able to provide resources and people that I trust will be able to help them in these situations is helpful for them. And just having contacts to make it smoother in the process, just a little bit smoother, I think is important. But from an emotional standpoint, I think just trying to relate with them and be understanding and tell them it's going to be okay and that we'll get through this and figure it out in the best way we can is really the best solution you can, and come through with it. Come through with it and don't make promises, but make them understand that you're going to come through with it and do everything, and make them feel like you can do everything you possibly can at that time of devastation.
I've talked about getting decision fatigue even in my normal life. So hearing you say that, I think, is really helpful for me to think through, because I do always think about, oh, well, maybe I'll ask them, would they rather have this or this? But yeah, it'd be better just make a decision, get it for somebody, and just let them not even have to think about it.
Specifically in that first little bit when your brain's not working. So just making the decisions for someone in that time is crucial. Well, thank you, Hays. We greatly appreciate your time and your expertise today in breaking down and understanding homeowner insurance. And I hope all of our listeners can go and look at their policies and look at what their dwelling coverage is, understanding what their personal property coverage is, as well as do they have that additional living expenses coverage, and really thinking about some of those extra things in your home that you may have that you want one of these add-ons to your policy to be sure that it's fully covered. And then we've gone over many natural disasters as well as even talking about cybersecurity. So having these discussions with your insurance agent to make sure you are covered in all the ways that you want to be protected. The other big bucket, we just want to make sure that everyone is doing a good job of being prepared in case something does happen. So this is a reminder to take time to do those videos within your home so you have that inventory of things that you have. It'll make it much easier if you do have to experience any sort of disaster. And then a tidbit for me is it's really great if you can keep those receipts either safe in your email or in a fireproof safe for any of those valuable items that you have in your home. If it's over $500, just use that as a baseline of, I should keep this receipt for a very long time as long as I have this, because it will help you if you need that in the future. And if you also do not feel like you understand any of the information we provided today and need some more time with it, please reach out to your agent or look for an agent that can explain these things, because I know it has been so valuable to us to have Hays walk us through this situation. So don't think about your insurance agent just being about someone who's trying to get you the best deal, but you really want someone that's going to be there to help represent you and help you if bad things do happen, because that's who you're going to be calling first and needing you to walk through that situation. This episode is going to be the conclusion. We've just had these two that we wanted to focus on fire safety last week, and then we wanted to talk about the aftermath and how to prepare for that this week. I really do hope that you all have learned something. That was my whole objective, not to make two shows to make you scared, but instead to give you empowerment to have yourself ready in case an emergency occurs and you are prepared as much as possible. If you enjoyed what you listened to and felt like you learned something, please take time to share this with your loved ones. We want this to be a great free resource for people to have and actually understand what's going on. As always, if there are any topics that you want Kitty and I to cover in the future, we would love to hear about them. You can always send us a text or you can email us. We'd love to hear from you. But we will be moving in this next month to musculoskeletal complaints that are common and have some specialists coming in to chat about those different topics, and are really excited to talk about some knee pain and some back pain in these upcoming weeks. So we'll go back to our normal programming, but we do appreciate you listening to these two specific episodes that we did.
All right. Thanks so much for sharing everything with us, Sarah, and we'll see you guys next week.